Here is the voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here. Today on the big program, lots to get to, lots to talk about. Want to start off today with an email from Mark in Cedar Rapids, who reminded me that we met in Cedar Rapids back during our Working Class Heroes tour and wanted my opinion on a New York Times opinion piece that he asked if I wrote. Now, my name is not on it, but he said, look, the reality is everything that you talked about while you were here in Iowa and as I listened along the tour was exactly what they're saying in this opinion piece several months later. And look, I like to believe that the New York Times spends all of their time listening to the little program here, and happy to share my ideas, happy to share my beliefs, my ideology, all of that stuff with them, because clearly they generally are not all that concerned with working class people. So if in some small way they picked up on this from our tour, from 18 years of doing this, good. It needs to happen. It needs to be done. And what I'm talking about is there was an opinion piece over on the opinion page at the New York Times, and the title was "One Thing That United These 12 Biden and Trump Supporters." And the one thing is, as I've been saying from the very beginning, the one thing is the fact that in order to reunite and revive our economy, reunite the country, revive the economy, we need to reunionize. We need to organize the workplaces. We need to reclaim the lunchroom. We need to have that commonality that brings us together. And what's that? Better wages, hours, conditions. We want to be able to support our families. We want to be able to take care of our families. We want to make sure that we go home safe. Those are the things that can unite us. Been saying that for all 18 years of doing this. And shocker of shockers, when the New York Times actually gets out of their ivory tower and goes out and grabs a couple of people and asks them a couple of questions, guess what they come up with? Exactly what we've been saying. That, across political ideology, across voter registration, nuts to bolts, people believe that they should have better wages, hours, conditions, and are willing to fight for them. Now, I do find some of the answers that they gave around their union membership to be in line with some ideological bends of, hey, I'm an individual. I don't really need that collective action, but I'll take it because it works. A lot of complaining because we're a complainer society. But it was interesting, when they started asking questions about solidarity, they started asking, what it means to them, what working class means. It's a lot of what we've been saying. Now, you go back through our Working Class Heroes tour, and we went to a lot of places that are struggling. We went and we chose those places on purpose to try and come to this. Because it's always been my thesis that, you give people a decent wage, you give them a good job, give them a future, all the other stuff will come around. So they grab 12 people, all over the political map, and they bring them together and they talk about the working class things that we wanted to talk about back in October and in November up till the election. They're within the realm of reality. They're between the curbs, if you will. They're not standing on the sidewalks, shouting and throwing at each other. And it's my belief and my hope. It's my great hope that we come back to talking to each other. We come back to together around the water cooler, at the lunchroom, because that's how things get solved. And the more polarized we are, the more that we put on our red hats or our blue hats, and the more we divide ourselves up into teams where my team has to win and your team has to lose, nothing gets done. But this little article that they came out with says, yeah, we're politically polarized. When you talked about working class issues, there was consensus. There was, again, across, Republican, Independent, Democrat, across all of the hats, there was some consensus. which is why you need politics to divide us. If it's not political, it's got to be religion. It's got to be something. There's got to be a divider. And I say this all the time. I remember a moment when the lunchroom was united. And when I first started working, you would go into a lunchroom and everyone was in the same kind of world. Their kids were going to schools. They had the same kind of positions in their life. The older people were trying to help the younger people. There was a community there built, and it was when right-wing talk radio really began to take hold. And I still remember the day one guy brought Rush Limbaugh's talking points into the lunchroom, and the division began, because it was no longer about how do we all do better. It's how do I do better. It was no longer about how do we get the best we can get for everyone and our community. It was the heck with you. I want mine. And that was really in my view, in remembering how we lost the lunchroom to radicalism. That was it. That was the kind of moment that, I remember when the business agent from our union would come in and say, hey, look, these are the people that we're supporting across the political spectrum, Democrats and Republicans. And here's why: because they support us, because they support the right of collective bargaining. They support the right to join and form unions. They support the right to having a closed shop to ensure that we don't have this division where we're ripped apart by these no rights at work laws. Everyone picked up the cards, put them in their pocket, took a second one for their spouse and said, yep, we're all on the same page. Because why? We want better wages, hours, conditions. We want better opportunities for our kids. We want better schools. We want better. The old Gompers quote, what does labor want? They want more. More of the things that make life better, more noble, more beautiful, all of those things, and less of the vice and the division and the hatred. What do we have now? We've got a lot of division. We've got a lot of hatred. And I believe a big portion of that is because we've unorganized the workplace. It's now hooray for me and the heck with you. It's now what is it? Over 40% of people are gig workers now, which really is, I will literally slit your throat for a penny so that I can take whatever this thing I do and make a buck off of it. Because we're all now little capitalists eating each other. And that is a perfect world for the real capitalists at the top who are using your labor cheaply. So when I see this piece, I'm like, finally, about time someone is picking up on the idea that we've been talking about here on the show for a very long time. The question I have is what comes out of it? And I've said this before. I do believe, and look, we've done a number of these tours over the years. We've done a number of get out the vote activities. We've done a number of town halls and stuff. How do we get to the point that we all want, which is, the kind of job that isn't a life, that we work to live, not live to work, that we have some health security, retirement security, so that as we get older, things aren't as difficult. We're not as worried. Because I think a lot of the problem that we're suffering through right now is, you ask anyone, and these folks who were questioned, they're not wrong when they say the economy is not great for them. They're not wrong when they say they're concerned that things are not going in the right direction. They're not wrong when their concerns they believe are not being addressed. They're not wrong. And this is where you come back to this idea of solidarity. And as I've been saying for years, every generation has to figure that out, has to rediscover it, and then move forward on it. Are we in that moment yet? I don't think so. I don't. Now, what's interesting is when they got to the argument of politics, this is the interesting part. That's when the division happened. So we've been trained like Pavlovian dogs that, I remember an era where you could sit and you could argue about anything political. We could have heated discussions, yelling and screaming all kinds of stuff at each other. Call us anything but, decent Americans. And when we were done, laugh about it, have a beer, see you tomorrow. We're not that society anymore. It's now we've created, because of our media culture, we have created an environment that says, I have to win. And therefore, you have to lose. And I have to dominate you, and I have to destroy you. Which is insane. Because that's not how it is. I know that's how the very well-to-do want us to think, so that we keep eating each other. We keep fighting each other. And we end up with bad politicians. You know, I was watching the Donald Trump town hall, and I'm going, really? This guy is a contender? This whiny, self-centered, he can only talk about grievance. He can only talk about being the victim. This is the guy that could be leading this country again? It's an interesting moment, because I think we could do so much better. We should be able to do so much better. And it goes all the way down the whole way. We don't vote for things anymore. I used to believe that I voted for policies. Yeah, because one of the things that came up during this conversation with the New York Times and the 12 people that they had was, should unions be involved in politics? And, well, no, they shouldn't be. And my response to that is, yeah, they have to be. Because one of the political parties is trying to make them illegal again. One of the political parties is trying to neuter them. That's the reason that they became political. This whole, 1947 forward, the Republican Party, over the veto of Harry Truman, creating out of whole cloth, out of just thin air, this idea of you have the right to work. Now, you don't have any rights and you don't have any work, but you have the right to work. Again, no rights, no work, but you have the right to work. It's brilliant messaging. But what it really means is you have the right to work for less wages, for less security, for less safety, and for more profit for the boss. That's what you have the right for. And they sold us on the idea that, yeah, that's what we want, that some want. Finally, I think people are coming around to it's bad policy. It doesn't work. States that have these designations have higher death rates on the job, have lower wages, have lower health care access, lower retirement access. But we're still told it's going to create jobs. Never mind what the governor of West Virginia said, that they passed the whole no rights at work package. They went after right to work. They went after and did away with prevailing wage. They went after all of those things that corporate America says that they need to thrive. And guess what? Nobody came. Because when you're at the bottom of the barrel, when you've finally reached the bottom in this race, they're going to go where it's more profitable for them regardless. And this is where I come back to the idea of solidarity and understanding that working class is not a bad word. This is that moment. Want to hear your thoughts? Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Do you see a way forward? Or, as some have told me, the only way forward for us as a country and as a working class is the next depression, that only misery and economic chaos bring people together. I hope they're wrong. But I'd love to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back. Stick around.
We are AFGE, the American Federation of Government Employees. We represent 700,000 federal and D.C. government workers who are the vital threads of the fabric of American life. We support our nation's military. We take care of our nation's veterans. We protect our nation's borders. We respond to our nation's crises and natural disasters. We provide services to our nation's seniors. The American Federation of Government Employees. We work for America.
The phone lines are open. Give Rick a call at 1-866-416-RICK. That's 1-866-416-7425.
We are AFGE, the American Federation of Government Employees. We represent 700,000 federal and D.C. government workers who are the vital threads of the fabric of American life. We support our nation's military. We take care of our nation's veterans. We protect our nation's borders. We respond to our nation's crises and natural disasters. We provide services to our nation's seniors. The American Federation of Government Employees. We work for America.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
There are bank records. Evidently, they're bank records. Republican from Kentucky, James Comer. He's the House Oversight Committee chairman. Big rally today, big press conference about evidently the Biden family. They have bank records. Did you know that? Did you know the Biden family has banking records somewhere? Evidently, that's what he said. And he came out during his conference, said, for the first time, the American people are going to see actual bank records that show wire transfers from adversaries around the world into a web of LLCs that were owned and controlled by the Bidens. And those transfers were made back to the Biden family accounts. Hold on. The money was transferred to the Bidens, and it was the Bidens' account. Isn't that redundant? But does it lead back to Joe? Now, interestingly enough, they never quite say that. But there are bank records. My thought is I'm watching Comer do this, and I'm watching my congressman, Scott Pardon Me Perry, tweet out, bank records don't lie, but president sure does. I don't know what that means, but because I don't know that he has weighed in on this. But this is one of those moments where the right wing was all in a tizzy today. They needed this. It was cover. It's all about Biden, and there's all this nefarious stuff going on. And look, I'm not saying nepotism doesn't happen. Never said that. I've never said that Hunter Biden didn't go, hey, my name's Biden. Give me money. I've never said that. But there's nothing there that says Joe Biden was involved in this. But the Biden family, because evidently they released 36-page memo accusing family members of earning millions of dollars while Biden was VP. And now, again, no evidence that there was any link to the vice president, him at the time, or the president now. None of that, but lots of allegations. And I love when Republicans do this because they do it masterfully. I should say, I love when politicians do this, but Republicans do it much better than Democrats. And look, Democrats either, get them to stop or up your game because you're falling off because you had Trump to go after. With Ivanka getting all the patents from China while she's actually working in the White House, the son-in-law with the billions of dollars from Saudi Arabia while actually working in the White House. This is one of those, they're pointing one finger at Biden while everybody is pointing back at the Trump administration and Republicans. Never mind, nothing to see, move along. But this is what they do. Now they've said, because, Comer, went to the FBI and said, hey, we want this specific thing, knowing that the FBI isn't going to give you one specific article of anything. They're going to say, okay, there's an investigation going on, and we can't, you know the language, we can't give you this because there's an ongoing investigation, potential ongoing investigation, failure to disclose, such a thing would harm our future possibilities of investigating. It would prejudice prosecution or judicial proceedings, unfairly violate privacy or reputational interest, or create misrepresentations in public. So they're basically saying there's nothing here. We don't have anything. But if I give you this one thing, you're going to use it and blow it out of proportion. And we're not going to get in the middle of this. While, having said that, being smack dab in the middle, because now Republicans go, see, Look at them. Look at them. There's there. And there's not. They're masters at creating this. And again, they've got this echo chamber that does an incredible job of ramping up this heated rhetoric and this conspiracy around every corner. And there's now a conspiracy that, Biden got, he's the big guy, got 10% of all money that the Biden family took in. And again, there's no proof there. And, but it doesn't matter. You don't need proof in this world. Now, interestingly enough, today, New York Republican Congressman George Santos turned himself in. He has been charged with 13 counts. 13 counts. 13 crimes, actual crimes. Not, hey, we think, not, hey, there's a memo somewhere. Actual crimes. Things like, wire fraud, things like misusing funds while in office, actual crimes that could send him to jail for quite a bit of time. And I look at this, and he was released on $500,000 bond. Now, he didn't pay it. Someone did. Question, who? Don't know. But when a sitting congressman, just throwing this out there, when a sitting congressman is released on $500,000 bond, that's a pretty big freaking deal. Kind of a big deal if you ask me, because it's a lot of money. And they made him surrender his passport. So it's my mind going, they think this guy's going to flee. They think he's going to put on his drag queen outfit and head off to Brazil or wherever. And I was a little disappointed. I got to tell you, I was a little disappointed because I see Santos as a guy who's an attention whore. I mean, he just is who he is. It's all about me. If you watch the presentation that he gave while, just yapping his mouth, where if you're a lawyer, you've got to go, please shut up. Please stop. You're killing me. But he on and on and on and on. But didn't show up in drag. And I was a little disappointed in that. I thought that would have given him a little more flair. He certainly would have gotten more attention. Now, he and an unnamed political consultant evidently encouraged donors to give money to his LLC instead of the campaign. Oops. Can't do that. He then used the money for personal expenses. That is against the law. He applied for unemployment benefits during the pandemic, even though he was employed by an investment firm and made $120,000 a year while claiming he's not getting any money. That's a big one. Also lied to the House of Representatives on their financial statements during the campaign in 2020, overstating one source of income, failing to disclose another, and then did it again in 2022. And there are tons of questions that an actual trial will solve. And for me, I care about what the person in the robe at the front of the room, they call him Your Honor, with the stick, with the little ball on the end. I care about what goes out in front of him, not what some congressman on the steps of the Capitol looking for attention is saying. I think Georgie's in trouble. Could see some time. Could see a lot of time. Want to hear your thoughts? Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 2005. That was the day United Airlines got the A-OK to ditch its pension obligations in federal bankruptcy court. Workers were dragged through years of employee ownership schemes, massive layoffs and concessions, and the gambling away of hard-earned pensions on the stock market. Then in 2002, United filed bankruptcy. Many asked, how could this happen to an airline owned by its workers? By 2005, creditors like Citigroup and JP Morgan were fully in control. Employee ownership had meant trading billions of dollars in deep wage cuts and givebacks for stock ownership and a couple of seats on the board. Controlling interest meant a 6-year no-strike pledge, the slashing of tens of thousands of jobs, and massive outsourcing. By 2005, the stock was worthless. Then United moved to weasel out of union contracts just 24 hours after the court ruled on the pension default. Some 130,000 pilots, flight attendants, mechanics, and ground service workers found their employee stock ownership plans empty. United executives turned billions of dollars over to the federal government, who then administered what was left through the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation. In most cases, those pensions were slashed in half, and monthly retiree health insurance costs exploded by 700%. One pilot stated, "I call it legalized crime. I lost almost all my United stock value in the bankruptcy, and here's another part of the retirement I was promised that is gone." Where does it end? You feel brutalized by the system. Somehow, the $6 million in benefits then CEO Glenn Tilton received wasn't affected by the default. Now that United is swimming in hundreds of millions in profit, many retirees have demanded the restoration of their original pension plans.
I'm a child of privilege, not the privilege of money. I come from a family of small-town working people. But it was my privilege to grow up in the public schools of Denison, Texas. There I received the rich blessings of dedicated classroom teachers, a diverse student body, playground socialization, librarians, coaches, cafeteria and custodial workers, student politics, vocational training, and a deep appreciation for the unifying value of community and the common good. That's why I'm flabbergasted by today's clique of corporate profiteers, theocratic zealots, and laissez-faire knuckleheads who are lobbying furiously across the country to demonize, defund, and dismantle this invaluable social benefit. If ignorance is bliss, they must be ecstatic. Public schools do have some real problems. Politicians constantly slashing education budgets, professional burnout created by understaffing and low pay, the devastating strain of a killer pandemic, and a new normal of assault rifle murders. But the profiteers, theocrats, and knuckleheads aren't interested in those. Instead, focusing on what they say is the fatal flaw in public education: teachers. Yes, the claim is that diabolical educators are perverting innocent minds by teaching America's actual history, showing students that the full diversity of humankind enriches our society, and presenting our earth as something to be protected, not plundered. And worse, oh my gosh, many classroom teachers are union members. So teachers suddenly find themselves political pawns in the GOP's culture war. Our schools are a cesspool of Marxist indoctrination, squawked Senator Marco Rubio. And Donald Trump squealed that schools are run by, quote, radical left maniacs and pink-haired communists. This is Jim Hightower saying these right-wing chicken littles are demonizing America's invaluable educators because they need someone for people to hate, providing cover for their unpopular plot to privatize education.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So the CNN town hall with Donald Trump wrapped up, and it was every bit of the live fest, the grievance fest, the giant S show that you would imagine that it would be. It was that and so much more. A couple of things jumped out at me right at first. He actually took credit for the Supreme Court overturning Roe, which my mind immediately goes, hold on. Did those justices tell him something different than what they told the confirmation folks? Because remember, they believed in decided law, and for him to say, hey, I did this, he had to have some different information. Anyway, here to share some thoughts on the giant S show. I've asked my good friend Craig Harrington to come share some thoughts with us. He's the chief cook and bottle washer over at Media Matters for America, MediaMatters.org, the website. Craig, thanks for taking time for us.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me on again, Rick.
So, gut reaction on the CNN. It's just like a clown show, setup. Any thoughts?
Yeah, it was a total disaster. If there's any silver lining, it's that CNN, as the third-ranked cable news network, didn't actually show this to very many people. Like, best case scenario, 1 million people maybe tuned in. Worst case scenario is their typical 500,000 to 700,000 in prime time. You know, CNN is a distant third-place network, and they did this because Frankly, they're desperate for ratings and
Yep,
they're starved for this attention. But man, the attention is not positive.
So it didn't help. My question then, did Van Jones come out and say, today Donald Trump was presidential? Did we get that from Van?
Yeah, it was actually very interesting. In the immediate post-game analysis, CNN did this thing that they've adopted a little bit since the 2020 election. They had their first panel of journalists where their sort of center chair was Jake Tapper. And then they had a second panel of political analysts where their center chair was Anderson Cooper, and that's where Van Jones appeared. In that first panel, though, it was like Dana Bash and John King, Jake Tapper, Abby Cornish, Abby Phillip, one other person whose name escapes me, but all real journalists. And they were just kind of shell-shocked. Dana Bash, just shell-shocked. They were like blown away by like, oh, this was what Trump is like. We forgot a little bit of what this experience was. They were shocked by how much he lied.
Wait a second. These are smart people.
Yeah.
I want to believe they're smart people. Are you telling me they forgot the 4 years of chaos we went through? They forgot that this guy will lie when the truth would be better, and if you get off his narrative, he's going to steamroll over you. They forgot?
Some of the I don't remember which commentator or which of their journalists it was, but one of them actually said, if you had forgotten what the Trump experience was like, this reminds you. And he just steamrolled Caitlin Collins, who was the host, and I guess she did as well as she could have, but like this was not a situation where she could have succeeded. She was alone on the stage with Donald Trump. There were something like hundreds of Trump supporters in the room. They were technically undeclared voters, but almost everyone they interviewed was like, they supported you in 2020, or they supported you in 2016 and 2020. One of them wasn't old enough to vote for Trump, but said they were undecided heading into this. But like they're still a college Republican, like a registered, a member of a Republican group. And so like this was not a situation where a journalist could succeed. And the journalists watching this seemed to have like this shocked realization, like, oh wow, this was what the Trump show was like. But to address your first point about Van Jones, February 2017. Van Jones sort of goes down in infamy for his response to Trump's first ever speech to a joint session of Congress, where he literally like fought back tears and said like this was the night that Donald Trump became president. I know, because Trump addressed a war widow essentially for frankly a military operation that was botched by Trump. And Jones, since the November of 2020, since the election night in 2020, he has really had a heavy pivot away from Trump, and he was just sort of disgusted and aghast by like the performance that we saw. But again, like this is what CNN in their pregame coverage started to talk a little bit about, like a thing they've become a meme for, which is like, would Trump have a pivot during this conversation? Would he use this as an opportunity to, I think they said, will he adopt a more, quote, balanced tone? And no.
And you wonder why no one watches CNN.
It's the post-game analysis from their political pundits, even the sort of the former Republicans and former Trumpers on it, everyone was kind of surprised by how combative he was. But most of the people who are watching this, I think if you're following along on Twitter, or obviously here at Media Matters, like we were watching this with much of our staff, and like this was what he wanted. Our president, actually, Angelo Carasone, tweeted very early on that like Trump was having a blast. He was clearly enjoying himself. This is what he wanted. He wanted easy sound bites. He wanted to be demonstrated sparring with a reporter, ideally with a woman reporter. Yep. He wanted to have these easy rhetorical wins where he could spew his well-rehearsed lies. He wanted to be fact-checked because if you notice in that room, which was hundreds of Trump supporters, when he would lie, they would applaud. And then when Caitlin Collins would fact-check him live, he would just roll right back through her and push right back and shove right on, and they would applaud him again. There were only 2 instances in more than an hour of questioning where she really just dug her feet in and stopped him in his tracks, and he got defensive. On one of those instances, he kept claiming that he built the wall along the Mexican border, which he did not. And she over and over and over just reiterated, you only built 52 miles of wall. You only built 52 miles of wall. You only built 52 miles of wall. And he got trapped on that, and she beat him on that one instance. On another instance, she just over and over said that he wasn't telling the truth about the Presidential Records Act, which he claimed allowed him to steal those documents when he left the White House and take them to Mar-a-Lago. And she just over and over again dug her feet in. But on other instances where she wasn't as persistent, or where he was simply more persistent, we saw really poor spectacles from this. For instance, the very first question was about the 2020 election, and he promoted the big lie. He didn't explicitly say that Joe Biden and Dominion voting systems and Smartmatic voting machines stole the election and rigged the results against him. But he said that if there was a fair election, and people have questions about whether or not 2020 was fair, if there was a fair election, he would be president. And he reiterated that again. She asked him at the very end if he would commit to accepting the results of 2020. And he said, yeah, if I think it's a fair election, which means if he wins. And so if he wins, he'll say that he accepts the election. And if he loses, he'll promote the big lie, which led to the insurrection at the United States Capitol, which potentially had which carried the potential of overthrowing the United States government and installing, a dictator, which is what many people in the crowd on January 6, 2021 were looking for when they stormed the United States Capitol building. He called Ashley Babbitt, who is an insurrectionist, a dead insurrectionist who was killed on January 6th by a police officer who was defending the United States Capitol. He called her a patriot. Collins said nothing. He called that police officer a thug. Collins said nothing. That police officer is black. Collins said nothing. Donald Trump then claimed that the police officer went on TV and bragged about his role in defending the Capitol on January 6th. That did not happen. She sort of pushed back and said, like, he didn't say that, but she said that off camera. He just got to steamroll through this over and over and over again. Now, because of that, because he's so undisciplined and so out of control, he actually walked himself into a couple of mistakes as well. There were the two instances where she really pushed back on the wall and on the Presidential Records Act. And then there were two other instances where he potentially looked bad. He took very proud ownership of the Dobbs decision to overturn Roe v. Wade. He said that he did that, and he was proud of it, and he was honored by it. And he said that that was him, that he overturned Roe v. Wade.
No one else could do it, only him.
And that is going to go into ads for eternity. And then I'm trying to think off the top of my head what the second instance was where he sort of slipped up. There was an instance where he brought up the Access Hollywood tape again, and he actually defended his position in the Access Hollywood tape that as a star, you're allowed to sexually assault women, and it's not assault because they want it, because you're a star. And so that he created a couple of instances where, like, Democrats are going to run ads about the things that he said because he's so undisciplined. But that combative nature, the sort of like the wrestling heel mentality of Trump, it is on full display in a situation like this town hall, and it is to his benefit. He only wins in this forum.
But here's the thing. When it comes to Trump, I don't think there are any undecideds. Does this move the needle any? No. Did this make any difference? No. This was just more feeding his ego, which is why I thought CNN doing it was stupid. Putting him out there and giving him an hour just to riff off of whatever he wants is just crazy. I mean, my favorite line for what I watched was when he was talking about the illegal votes and how many votes were. He said there were so many illegal votes in Wisconsin, they didn't know what to do. What do you mean they didn't know what to do?
Yeah.
We got all these illegal votes. What do we do with them? I mean, it was crazy listening to him just spew. But this is what he is, and it's who he is. And anybody who expected this leopard to change his spots should not be in any political position of analysis or journalism whatsoever.
Literally yesterday, a jury of his peers in New York City awarded a $3 million defamation damage to E. Jean Carroll, the journalist who said that she was raped and defamed by Donald Trump. They did not have enough evidence to prove her claim of rape, but they did find Trump was liable, not guilty. It was a civil case, not a criminal case. They found Trump liable for sexual misconduct against her and for defamation. The sexual misconduct, they awarded, I believe, a $2 million compensation for that portion, and the defamation was a $3 million compensation. And that was literally less than 24 hours ago, maybe 26 hours ago. And then tonight on CNN, he starts defaming E. Jean Carroll again. He says, he just goes through the whole rap sheet of all the terrible things that he said about E. Jean Carroll. And the thing that is the indelible takeaway from the CNN town hall is the laughter. When he was describing sexual assault, when he was describing E. Jean Carroll's sexual assault, the audience laughed. To them, to Republican primary voters, this is hilarious. Not just that it's false, not just that it's a lie, it's actually very funny.
No,
And that's, we
but
just live in different universes.
Did we need a town hall to understand that his voters, his supporters, nothing he does is out of bounds? Do we need this display to go, oh yeah, now did we need this?
Yeah, I mean, 6 years ago, we heard obviously they voted with their feet. 63 million Trump voters voted for him after the locker room talk, right? After the Access Hollywood tape came out. And then 74 million of them voted for him a second time in 2020. Is it a shock that a room with 200 or 400 or however many Trump supporters would think that sexual assault is not just like fair game, but actually like a great game to play? No, it's not surprising at all. We've seen a million testimonials about this. It shouldn't have been surprising. But what it did create was really disgusting television. And oddly enough, it actually might have opened up new civil liability against Donald Trump. Like, could E. Jean Carroll sue him again for this? Maybe. There's no double jeopardy in civil law. Like, he just maybe committed a new crime. Like, sue him again, sure.
Yeah, $5 million to Trump that he might not pay it. It'll take a decade or 2 decades to get. Does he care about that? No, not really. His ego is so big. It doesn't. None of this stuff matters, I believe.
Yeah, and you and I, here we are now. We've been talking about this for 15 minutes. Like, God, we're back in the morass of the Trump world. Like, he is such a dominant media figure. He makes really compelling TV, right? People watch and they are outraged, or they are shocked, or they laugh along with him. But this man was prime time for the entirety of his presidency. And even though he was chaotic and dangerous and a lot of people died, millions of Americans lost their lives during the Trump administration that did not have to. I think the excess mortality in the wake of COVID in the US is like over 3 million people. The COVID deaths alone are 1 million. Like, that's Trump's fault. And yet here he is still dominating on television. And what is CNN, as a ostensibly reliable and legitimate news organization, what are they supposed to do? He's still a Republican frontrunner. He actually took a shot at Ron DeSantis that every time Ron DeSantis gets hit by Trump, you just sort of realize, like, this man was not prepared for the Trump show. Yeah. He hit DeSantis so hard tonight. He has a 40-point lead on Ron DeSantis, and he is just wailing on him. And he took another shot, a heavy shot in this town hall that probably landed, if I know anything about how Trump media and Trump supporters are going to respond. He is the Republican frontrunner. He has a 40-point lead. He is almost certainly going to be the Republican nominee, barring some unforeseen circumstance. We don't know what it would take to knock Trump off this pedestal. The media is behind him. Fox is behind him. Newsmax is behind him. They're increasingly competing with one another to see who can get more behind him in the wake of this sort of Tucker Carlson calamity. We find ourselves in a situation where, like, Trump is the inevitable Republican future, and the media is just going, like, they have to change their rules. They have to adopt a new playbook for how to deal with someone like this. We've never had a president run for re-election. We never had a former president run for re-election like this before in over 100 years. The modern media ecosystem entirely evolved after Grover Cleveland's discontinuous presidency. There is no predicate for dealing with this. But we've also never had a president who, like, led an insurrection against the United States government. We've never had someone who was going to be a Republican nominee who had led a coup. And they don't know how to handle this. And frankly, I don't have all the solutions either, but I instinctively, intuitively, I knew that giving him a town hall and a free reign for 90 minutes of airtime was not the solution. And boy, howdy, it was not the solution.
No, and look, it was everything I expected it was going to be. And to be honest, it was a little more. I mean, you're right. He did walk himself into a couple of big questions. The Dobbs thing is huge. I mean, he admitted right out there saying, yeah, I put them on the court. They did it. They did what I wanted them to do. I did this. So he kind of he threw them under the bus. I do want to get your thoughts on real quick before you go. Evidently, Tucker Carlson is now moving over to Twitter.
Yeah.
So we're going to get the unvarnished Tucker now. No more having to do what Fox tells him to do. Did you see his victim video where, when you're in the media, they tell you what to do and you have to play in that? He really played the victim card. Oh my gosh, so well. But now he's going to be real now. So all those lies I told you before, I'm going to be truthful now.
It was actually very interesting. In the middle of that like 2.5 minute video, he's released two videos on Twitter. They're his basically only responses after he was sort of unceremoniously fired by Fox News 2 weeks ago. And in the middle of that video, he actually said, like, fact checkers, dweebs like me, and people who report facts, like dweebs like you, they actually do report the facts, but it's not the truth. And the truth and the facts aren't the same thing. And what he was going to report on was the truth, and he was going to use this platform to do it. I was not aware that what we were watching for the past 7 years of the white power hour in prime time on Fox News, I wasn't aware that was the varnished Tucker Carlson. I can't imagine. Well, I mean, obviously, I can't imagine where he might go with the sort of imprimatur of Elon Musk and the freedom provided by Twitter. But we sort of are just now waiting for, like, where is the brick wall that causes him and Elon Musk to have a fight? Because if Tucker Carlson is going to push every boundary, it's going to end up somewhere. And I suspect it'll be something he says in the wake of a school shooting, or something he says in the wake of something truly heinous that he says in the wake of a very high profile event, that even Elon Musk is going to realize, like, that he sort of trapped himself in a cage with a lion. But in the meantime, Tucker Carlson seems like he's going to use this opportunity on Twitter to get increasingly toxic, as Twitter itself has become increasingly toxic and increasingly reflective of the right-wing viewpoints of its owner, Elon Musk. It's increasingly a website that isn't very good, and it also heavily promotes the right-wing content and the stuff that Elon wants to see. And so if you're using Twitter, it's very likely that whenever Tucker starts his limited series or his exclusive videos, that those things are just going to show up in your feed. They're going to be at the top of your For You page. They're going to be recommended right into your your feed that you used to use for news or for keeping in touch with friends or for random acquaintances or however it is you use Twitter back in the old days. We're now going to just see a lot more Tucker Carlson on that platform, and that's going to be a real problem for an organization like Twitter that's bleeding advertising dollars, and where blue chip advertisers and blue chip companies do not want to see their brands associated with this stuff. They were not advertising on Tucker's show on Fox for a reason. And now he's going to be sort of mainlined by Twitter. The fascinating thing is, the money involved. So Tucker seems to have broken a $25 million clause in his exit agreement with Fox News and forfeited that $25 million, which he's going to fight for in court, in exchange for going over to Twitter. But it's possible that Elon can just offer him just far more than the cash value of that Fox contract. It remains to be seen where this goes. But one thing we do know, and I apologize for sort of going on here, but we've seen extremely polarizing, popular, formerly profitable Fox personalities exit before, and they have essentially evaporated. When Glenn Beck left Fox and founded The Blaze, I think in his first full year of operating that organization, he brought in like $95 million, like a fascinating payday. He made as much as like Oprah Winfrey in 2013 or something like that. But Glenn Beck is no longer influential. He's just extremely rich. And he's not influential anymore because Fox News is a political party. It's a political apparatus. And when he was the headliner at Fox News, he was like kind of their president. He was the leader of that party. And when he left, he could make a ton of money in the private sector, but he didn't have the influence anymore that was provided to him by Fox. It's entirely plausible, and it's probably even likely that Tucker is going to make a lot of money on Twitter and a lot of money from his collaboration with Elon. But whether or not he can have the same influence remains to be seen, because Fox is the political operation. When you run Fox, you run the show.
Yeah.
And you really need look no further than who is the guy that Tucker Carlson replaced. Tucker Carlson was a nobody. And then he replaced Bill O'Reilly, the king of Fox News, the king of conservative media. Bill O'Reilly's still alive. He's just completely obscure now. Tucker replaced him, built upon him, went to heights that Bill O'Reilly could have never seen. And now he'll be replaced too. And the real question isn't really what Tucker Carlson's going to do. The question is, like, is the next Tucker Carlson replacement going to be even worse than Tucker, who was even worse than Bill, who was even worse than Glenn?
And I say yes,
because that is the system we've seen previously.
Do we have any idea who the replacement was going to be? I've heard people throw out Candace Owens' name a couple of times, and I'm like, I don't know about that. But
I can only imagine.
But I can only imagine it could be somebody worse.
Yeah, I mean, I can only imagine how many blood vessels would burst for Tucker Carlson if he was replaced by a black woman. But I don't think it'll be Candace Owens. I sort of jokingly remarked that I thought maybe Harris Faulkner from their daytime program would be the next one up. The obvious clone who they have on staff is Will Cain. He has done everything he could to rebuild himself as a sort of right-wing provocateur in Tucker's mold. This is a guy who used to be like a sideline reporter for ESPN. It's possible it could be someone like Will Cain, who they already have on staff. But it's possible that it's someone who we wouldn't expect. In 2017, you wouldn't have expected Tucker Carlson to be prime time, to be big time, rather. He was like a weekend replacement host. He was the guy who was famous for falling asleep on the set of Fox and Friends once. And then he became, the king of Fox. It's possible that it's going to be someone who we don't expect. They're testing a bunch of different hosts. They tested Brian Kilmeade the first week, then Lawrence Jones. This week they're testing Kayleigh McEnany. One of our researchers, Ruby Seavey, actually has this really interesting thing that was published on Monday about the 50% decline we saw in that 8 p.m. time slot's ratings in the 2 weeks since Tucker left. They need someone who can bring back those viewers. And oddly enough, we actually just saw this in November 2020. Fox lost viewers when they correctly called the 2020 presidential election for Joe Biden. And Tucker brought those viewers back by going all in on white supremacy and all in on the election lie that cost Fox $800 million in the defamation case with Dominion voting systems. It's entirely plausible the person who replaces him is going to chase that same dragon and take Fox into another rabbit hole that's going to be disastrous for the network in the same way the Dominion suit was disastrous for them. But that's the only way they can stay relevant is to chase that audience down. Yeah. They can't afford to have that many people leave for Newsmax or to log off entirely. They need them.
Maybe they can work out a deal with the Department of Corrections and get Stuart Rhodes from his jail cell. Yeah, who knows? Lastly, I want to get your thoughts on the latest defamation suit against Fox. Nina Jankowicz, who was on this program, talking about her want to sue Fox. In fact, full disclosure, I actually donated to her campaign to hold Fox accountable. She's actually filed a new defamation suit against Fox. Are we going to see more of these kind of? I know the shareholders are suing. I know there's the Smartmatic suit. Yeah. Now this one, will we see a jump in these?
You would think that you would. What the Dominion case and really the settlement in favor of Dominion, what it showed was the predicate for actually winning these cases. I suspect that the next thing we're likely to see is the Smartmatic case will probably settle. Smartmatic is going to demand sort of a king's ransom akin to what was given to Dominion. Murdoch and the family are going to fight back against it. But, I've watched a couple of Jankowicz interviews, including on your program. And it's interesting, there are more people who have been defamed by this network. Some of them are major public figures. Some of them are simply associates of major public figures. It's entirely plausible that there are more defamation cases in the pipeline that are really going to get sort of shaken loose from the tree in the wake of the Dominion defamation settlement. We just don't know. It's still very early, and these things take time. But sometimes this will sort of cascade. And you and I have talked about this previously as a sort of like possible the defamation settlement with Dominion will be like a rainmaker incident for Fox, where you have a first suit that wins and it proves the concept that you can land one of these big settlements against Fox News, and that there actually are legal boundaries to how much Fox can damage individuals or institutions or companies. And then with the predicate set, you'll see more and more and more, and they'll just snowball and roll downhill. Where this stops, we don't know. But we do know that the last time Fox was so imperiled as they are now, they went full on the defamation to bring that audience back. Yeah. And are they going to be willing to do it again? We'll see.
That is the question. But Craig, I appreciate the time. Great stuff as always. Hope folks will check out the website, MediaMatters.org. Craig Harrington, Chief Cook and Bottle Washer over there at Media Matters. Appreciate the time, brother.
Yeah, thank you. Have a good night.
Let's take a quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Every time the alert comes on, we're on the alert. You want to look, and yet you're scared to look because they might say it's your town that's actually on fire.
Early, intense wildfire outbreak pushes Alberta, Canada into state of emergency. Study concludes Spain's record-shattering extreme heat impossible without climate change. Plus, offshore wind farms are far less dangerous to birds than previously thought, study finds.
Lies in that study. All of those stories and more straight ahead from BradBlog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
Freedoms, they're under attack. They feel it every day. They see it when they watch the news, whether it's your light bulbs, your toilet flushers, your shower heads, your gas stoves, or this week your washing machines.
Well, thank you for that list of things that nobody is taking away from anyone. Senator Marsha Blackburn, you loon. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, you never report on all of the things that are being taken away from people. Why is that?
You mean I don't report on all the things that aren't happening?
You don't report on imaginary things. That is correct.
True.
What do you got for us today that isn't imaginary?
Well, first, very tragic news. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, over 400 people were killed and entire villages swept away after torrential rains triggered catastrophic flooding. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres called it, quote, yet another illustration of accelerating climate change and its disastrous impact on countries that have done nothing to contribute to global warming. Meanwhile, early extreme summer heat is striking across the northern hemisphere. The unseasonable heat and windy conditions have already unleashed an early and intense wildfire season in Alberta, Canada, where a provincial state of emergency was declared over the weekend. Fire crews are battling more than 110 active fires in the province, 31 classified as out of control. As Alberta wildfire spokesperson Christy Tucker explained,
that's significantly more wildfire activity for this time of year than we've certainly seen any time in the recent past. It's going to get hotter, it's going to get windier, and we're expecting some extreme wildfire behavior.
Alberta is a major tar sands oil producer, and the fires have forced companies to shut down production. But so far, oil facilities do not appear to be in immediate danger.
Oh, well, thank God. I can't help but note the irony. Year after year, as we see these fires in Alberta, Canada, tar sands oil country, as you point out, causing the very conditions that are destroying them.
And a recent study in British Columbia found that even short-term exposure to wildfire smoke increases the occurrence of heart attacks and respiratory issues.
Well, keep digging that dirty, deadly tar sands oil.
In Southeast Asia, an astonishingly persistent month-long heat wave actually intensified over the weekend. One weather historian called it, quote, the longest tropical record heat event the world has experienced. Over the weekend, Vietnam hit a new all-time high national record of 111 degrees Fahrenheit. Laos and Thailand's capital of Bangkok also hit new all-time highs, and it's only May. The extreme heat has been compounded by intense smog that has intensified pollution levels. A 2022 study determined that dangerous heat waves, which are defined as hotter than 103 degrees Fahrenheit, will hit 3 to 10 times more frequently by the end of this century due to man-made climate change. In Europe, recent record-breaking April temperatures in Spain, Portugal, Algeria, and Morocco would have been, quote, almost impossible in the absence of man-made global warming. That's according to a new rapid response analysis by an international team of scientists at the World Weather Attribution Network, who also calculated that the extreme heat in Spain was made 100 times more likely by human-caused climate change. All four countries are grappling with a multi-year drought that is exacerbated by the high temperatures. The researchers also concluded that extreme heat in Europe is rising faster than computer climate models had projected.
So no more rain in Spain, mainly on the plain or otherwise.
True. Finally, a new study shows that offshore wind farms are much less dangerous to birds than previously thought and are not a major contributor to bird mortality. The 2-year study used radar and cameras to create a 3-dimensional image of birds' flight patterns at a wind installation in the UK's North Sea. No collisions were recorded between birds and wind turbines, and in fact, the study found seabirds of all species adapted to deliberately avoid offshore wind turbine rotor blades. The researchers hope the results will enable them to predict and address collision risks more accurately in the future and simplify the wind farm permitting process.
Lies, it's all lies. We all know that the wind turbines kill all the birds. Let's just go with that. For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com.
Are you tired of think tank approved corporate news and commentary? Are you tired of CEOs telling you what to think, who to hate, and who to vote for? Well, welcome to the Rick Smith Show. We don't take orders from some boardroom, and we don't do focus groups or talking points. We don't work for them, and we never will. I'm Rick Smith, and I work for you. Join us daily at thericksmithshow.com and download the podcast and never miss a minute.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So, Vice President Kamala Harris has pulled out of an MTV event. Look, you're not going to cross a picket line. She's standing in solidarity with the Writers Guild writers because they're on strike, as you know, and you would expect nothing less out of this administration. And look, we're in a moment right now where labor activity is at a high. Labor approval is at a high, and I keep saying we've got to go back, learn the lessons of the past so that we don't make the mistakes in the future and understand, what it took to build that most prosperous working class that our grandparents' generation built. There were strikes, there were sit-ins, there were all kinds of things that, we didn't learn in history class, which is why I was thrilled to find over at PBS there is a film on the Memorial Day Massacre. And that's why I've asked Greg Mitchell to come talk with us. Greg is an author, also the film's director of Memorial Day Massacre. Workers Die, Film Buried. We'll get links out on social media. You can take a look at it at gregmitchphoto.com/the Memorial Day Massacre with dashes between them. We'll get links out. Trust me, you'll find it. Greg, thanks for taking time for us.
Oh, I'm very, very pleased to be here.
So why this now? I mean, this happened back in 1937. This is a past, way in the past, been buried for so long. Why does this matter now?
Well, it matters, as you mentioned. There is a surge in union activity today, and it's sort of alarming when you find that so few people in general, and even a lot of workers and union people and their families don't really know the history of this particular incident, which amazingly is largely forgotten today, even though 10 workers were shot and killed by Chicago police, and none of the police ever suffered because of it. They actually shot 40 people, the majority of them in the back as they ran away. So it's a totally shocking, and I often do write books or make films about incidents that when I hear about them or read about them, I say, exactly what you just said. How come I don't know about this? I've written a dozen books. I've directed 3 films now, and almost all of them come back to that question. Why don't I or why don't we know about this? So when that happens, it really gets my attention, and then I probe more deeply into it.
No, it's good that you do it. In fact, you've got a book out now and an ebook available at barnesandnobles.com titled the same thing, Memorial Day Massacre, Workers Die, Film Buried. So the film buried part of this was 1937. There weren't cameras everywhere like there are today. And there was a film of this. There, I guess it was Paramount who had a film out there, film crew taking pictures of this, and they decided this was not just someone said, "Hey, let's hide this." There was a decision to not release the film, wasn't there?
That's right. Yeah. Well, of course, as a lot of people know, newsreels were incredibly popular then, almost as popular as TV today. People went to the movies all the time then, and they all had newsreels before them. So Paramount was one of the leading newsreel companies, and they had a cameraman at the scene. Just to set the scene a little bit, this is in 1937. It was at sort of the peak of labor activity. There had been the whole wave of sit-in strikes at General Motors and Ford, et cetera. And so there was a great steel strike across the Midwest and Pennsylvania, what they call the little steel companies, but they weren't little. And so they called a strike to try to get what workers at the U.S. Steel had gotten. And they called their first picket lines, and the police clubbed them and sent a lot of people to the hospital. So they called for a picnic on Sunday, Memorial Day. It was celebrated on a Sunday then, and for a family picnic and for other workers to show up and show solidarity with the strikers. And so they got a turnout of maybe 1,500 people, a beautiful sunny day, a lot of children, a lot of women. And so they decided, well, let's march towards the Republic Steel plant in South Chicago, and we'll try to set up a legal mass picket line as they had been told they could. Halfway there, the police, a giant mass of police, stopped them and would not let them go further. And then the police started firing at point blank range. Everyone, including the women and children in the crowd, ran away. And as I mentioned, 40 in all were shot. The majority of them in the back or the side. And then the police went through the crowd and clubbed people, again, including women, lying on the ground. So you had another 50 people who went to the hospital with head injuries. So you would think this was an incredible scandal that would reverberate around the country. But in fact, the media, with rare exceptions, pictured this as the police having to stop these marchers, police defending property, police defending the workers who were back in the plant. And in fact, even the major papers, New York Times, Washington Post, et cetera, pictured this as a riot, that the police had been attacked by a mob. And that carried the day for 2 or 3 weeks. But as you mentioned, the second part of my subtitle, Film Buried, is because a Paramount cameraman did catch all this. He showed police firing on them. He showed them clubbing people as they ran away. And Paramount suppressed the footage. It did not come out for over a month. And the only reason it did come out was because of one investigative reporter and a crusading senator, Robert La Follette, of Progressive from Wisconsin. And so the footage finally came out after more than a month. And even then, it was banned by officials in Chicago, in St. Louis, and some other cities. So,
of course, it was.
Yeah, so it's an incredible story. But like I said, it made me say, 10 killed. How is it possible? I don't know this.
Yeah, now you'd have some people today, Greg, say, well, that couldn't happen today. Our news media wouldn't suppress, this kind of behavior because we don't shoot workers anymore, do we? We don't do that much anymore, right?
Well, this in fact was the last really major kind of confrontation where there were so many lives lost. There were shortly after this, there were a couple who were shot in, I think, Youngstown. But in fact, if you want to say both the workers and the police kind of learned a lesson in the sense that they did try to cool the kind of confrontations that would lead to this kind of violence because of the shocking number of people, shot and killed here. This really stands. There's nothing comparable to 10 people getting killed in a single day. So if you want to say there's some positive after effect, it was in a way that we haven't seen quite such a bloody Sunday since then in the U.S.
You listen to the Rick Smith Show here with Greg Mitchell. Greg's the author of Memorial Day Massacre: Workers Die, Film Buried. We'll get links out on social media how you can pick that up, or you can go to barnesandnoble.com and get that. He's also the film's director of the Memorial Day Massacre film. Highly suggest taking a look at that. You can find it over at pbs.org, or we'll get the link out to gregmitchphoto.com where you can get the film as well. Because it's free now to watch, right? Anybody can go and stream it online. In fact, we want people to do that, right?
Yeah, it premiered over the weekend on PBS, and now it's up on their site at pbs.org. You can find it. It's 27 minutes, and it's totally free, and you can watch it streaming on any PBS app or right on your computer.
Outside of just telling just the facts, ma'am, that this is what happened, Do you hope something comes out of this, an education process? Do you hope people pay attention? Some kind of cautionary tale? Is there something you're hoping comes out of it?
Yeah, well, I think I mean, I mentioned one thing about helping to maybe suppress the fatal violence since then, but it also showed the steadfastness of workers. You mentioned that a lot of people today not appreciating what the union people went through then. They hear stories or they hear references to the Ludlow massacre and Haymarket and things like that, but the hundreds of thousands or millions of workers uh, who were in danger of losing their jobs went out on strike, sit-ins, which were incredibly dangerous, but were very successful for a while. People putting themselves on the line and picket lines, the numerous cases of police beating people on picket lines and strikers, maybe not 10 killed in a day, but so there's sort of an appreciation of what people had to go through, and today, of course, you still, as you mentioned, there is a surge in labor activity. I hope this film helps boost that, or I hope people who are getting excited about this, and the film does focus on this towards the end. All of these new actions in new fields, Amazon. Starbucks, Apple, we list some in the book, even very, very small. It's from a bank like Wells Fargo to a small company like Bandcamp. Every day there are new fields. And then, you mentioned the Writers Guild, which is a more venerable organization, of course, very white collar. But they have quite a large, important strike now. So it is an exciting time, and I think the more people learn about how we got here, it can only help push that further.
And the struggles that it took to gain the things that were gotten. I think back to my grandparents and their generation. They literally came back from World War II fighting fascism overseas to coming to the shop floor and fighting for, that what we think now of as the American dream. That you work hard, play by the rules, get ahead. And I believe that compact has been broken for far too many working people. So in this moment, I think people are looking for a way of reclaiming some kind of community, reclaiming some kind of prosperity. And the labor movement, for me, as I've been saying, for all 18 years doing this show, is that's how we rebuild, revive, reunite. We just got we reunionize. At least that's my thought.
Well, this and again, this period going back to 1937 and what these strikers won was something as basic as the 8-hour day, time and a half for overtime, weekends, the whole concept of a weekend. This is not that long ago. 1937 is not really all that long ago. People take for granted what these things produce. So, I mean, these people were real heroes to stick this out and brought it to all the other. There might have been a strike in an auto industry or steel or the miners, but it spread and was put in effect in other areas as well. It became the norm, so every victory was an important victory. And the steel strikers, even though they were beaten and killed and wounded on Memorial Day, 1937, did eventually win their demands in terms of the getting the contract, getting the recognition, and getting what they were demanding.
What they were fighting for. And at the end of the day, it still comes back to that war between labor and capital. And the power that capital has of news media and law enforcement and the legal structure that tends to be against working people. And I fear we're kind of in the same moment. Last line of questioning I've got. I know you've got a Substacks page. I hope folks will take a look at it. How do we find that?
Well, if you go to Substack, which is you get the newsletter in your mailbox if you subscribe. If you go to Substack, you search my name, and it's called Between Rock and Hard Place. So it focuses on music and politics, and I think you'll like that. And I should mention that, the film on PBS, you'll be able to probably in horror see the film footage that was suppressed. There's a lot of focus on this cover up and how it was broken. My book, I would recommend because it's an oral history, and you have dozens of labor activists, many of whom were eyewitnesses that day, some of whom were wounded. So the book focuses more on the stories of the Union people at the time, where the film focuses more on this footage and the cover up that happened.
I hope folks will take a look at it. I know I'm going to, as a student of labor history. It's something I think it's important that we pass down to future generations. But Greg, I appreciate the time. Great film. I hope folks will take a look at it either at pbs.org or over at gregmitchellphoto.com/the-memorial-day-massacre. We'll get links out on social media so you can check that out. But Greg, thanks so much for the time. Appreciate it.
Very, very happy to be here and talk to your audience particularly.
Thanks so much, Greg. Appreciate it. Want to hear your thoughts? Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Right back after this. Stick around.
We are AFGE, the American Federation of Government Employees. We represent 700,000 federal and D.C. government workers who are the vital threads of the fabric of American life. We support our nation's military. We take care of our nation's veterans. We protect our nation's borders. We respond to our nation's crises and natural disasters. We provide services to our nation's seniors. The American Federation of Government Employees. We work for America.
We are AFGE, the American Federation of Government Employees. We represent 700,000 federal and D.C. government workers who are the vital threads of the fabric of American life. We support our nation's military. We take care of our nation's veterans. We protect our nation's borders. We respond to our nation's crises and natural disasters. We provide services to our nation's seniors. The American Federation of Government Employees. We work for America.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So I gotta tell you, I watched the film over at pbs.org, and it's well done. And they show the footage that was hidden because, who would not be angry at a bunch of cops just randomly shooting into a crowd of people who were peacefully assembling and demanding better wages, hours, conditions. And they go into how the newspapers all were, they were rioting, they ruckus, they were, all of this kind of framing that be afraid of those working people. Because remember back then, and this is something I didn't get into him with, but a lot of the people who worked in these factories, they were immigrants. A lot of these people there were those people, there was already that kind of, that division. But here were these folks who were all wanted the same thing. They wanted a better life. They wanted better wages, better conditions. They wanted because the steel mills were much more dangerous back then. They wanted opportunities. And you had the CEO, and they go into the film, who was vehemently anti-union. Over his dead body, was it ever going to happen? And these workers, they stuck together, and that was really the story of that, my grandparents' generation and a little bit older. They fought these wars, these battles. And our history doesn't remember them. Honestly, until we started doing labor history a couple of years ago, I didn't realize just how many of these kind of events happened throughout our history. And yet we came up with 3 years of something happening every day to working people in this country. And look, we worked hard, but not that hard. So take a look at it. I think it's well worth it. We'll get links out on how that can get out and be seen. I think, again, in this moment of people, saying we need to fight for better wages, hours, conditions, opportunities, understand what the past was, might help us in the future. And remember, workers of the past didn't always didn't always stay on the happy side of the law. Sit-in strikes were not legal. There was no law that said you have the right to sit in. No, these people took it in their own hands to fight for better. Because back in 1937, it was still almost illegal to be a union member. 1935, you get the National Labor Relations Act. They're flexing their muscle a little bit. But the employer mindset is, no, I'm the master. You'll do what we say. So again, I think an interesting time, because there's so much that we have to look at what's going on today. When the money is against the people, when the moneyed interests, because there's this ongoing war of capital versus labor, and labor always seems to get the short end of the stick because we're so easily divided. And where I started off today, where I started off with the New York Times piece, which is why I was like, wow, the New York Times actually knows how to spell the word solidarity. Good for them. They must be listening to the show. They even showed, look, that when working people are focused on the right issues and they get away from the stuff that's deliberately put in their road to divide them, they come to the right choices. They come to something that can move us forward. Just my thought. Kentucky, interesting Kentucky governor race coming up. Former UN ambassador Kelly Craft, who I guess is running in the hotly contested primary there in Kentucky. She said if she were elected, if elected, we quote, and I'm going to quote this, we will not have transgenders in our school system. I don't know what that means. I don't know if you're throwing them out. I don't know if you're going to go to their houses and dress them differently. I don't know if there's an indoctrination camp coming. I'm not quite sure what that means. But people should be kind of freaked out about the right-wing view on what we should do with our kids, especially in school. Because I go over to Tennessee again. Tennessee, with the senator there, Marsha Blackburn, who has said that she believes the way to keep our schools safe is that grandparents could join up with military vets who are armed, retired cops. They could protect the school. She said they know to de-escalate situations. I've heard a lot of talk. I've talked a lot to them, and they like this idea. They are grandparents like we are. My husband and I are grandparents, and they want to be there to help protect children. I'm like, you mean the ones that are shooting people in the driveway because they pulled into the wrong driveway? You mean the ones that are shooting kids, black kids, because they ring the doorbell? You mean the ones that are these old curmudgeons who are shooting people because a ball rolled into their yard? I don't know that a bunch of old curmudgeons with access to guns, as curmudgeon-y as they are, with a bunch of kids running around agitating them and annoying them, I don't know that that's the right. I'm just saying. I'm not quite sure. Not there with you, Marcia. But one thing I do know is not the guns, right? In fact, we're going to give... As I was reading that, my mind went to this place because, as a kid, I spent a lot of time around people of advanced age. My mother worked in a nursing home, and I remember some of the old folks with their eyesight failing, with their reflexes not so great. I'm imagining some of those folks well armed, armed to the teeth with a hair trigger and a limited amount of patience. And I'm seeing nothing positive, but this is the kind of stuff we get from the right. There are no solutions there. There's no real solution there. That's to get her couple minutes on the F channel, promoting guns and not doing any type of actual work. It's kind of frustrating. But the Kentucky thing, that's scary. Because I do see someone eventually coming out and say, no, we need indoctrination camps, re-education, like the Christian folk do. I'm waiting for it. Want to hear your thoughts? Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Right back after this. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1980. That was the day that as many as 90,000 people rallied for the passage of the Equal Rights Amendment in Grant Park in Chicago, Illinois. The proposed amendment to the Constitution read, "Equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex." The idea to amend the Constitution to ensure equal rights for women was first proposed by Alice Paul in 1923. In the late 1960s, with the second wave feminist movement, the push for the amendment gained momentum. At the time, women only made 59 cents for each dollar earned by men. Not all labor leaders supported the Equal Rights Amendment. Some worried that the proposed constitutional amendment would nullify existing labor protections for women in the workforce. They instead advocated for legislation around specific issues faced by women. Myra K. Wolfgang, a vice president of the Hotel and Restaurant Employees and Bartenders International Union, testified against the ERA before the Senate in 1970. The ERA passed Congress in 1972, but in order for the amendment to go into effect, 38 states had to ratify it. 30 quickly did so, but then a backlash against the legislation began to gain momentum. Illinois was the only northern state that was a holdout for ratifying the amendment. A massive rally was planned. That morning, the Chicago Tribune described the crowd that was expected, including representatives from labor, religion, show business, politics, and the home. Despite this massive turnout, the Equal Rights Amendment failed to win enough support in Illinois. The amendment fell 3 states short of becoming the law of the land. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
I'm a child of privilege, not the privilege of money. I come from a family of small-town working people. But it was my privilege to grow up in the public schools of Denison, Texas. There I received the rich blessings of dedicated classroom teachers, a diverse student body, playground socialization, librarians, coaches, cafeteria and custodial workers, student politics, vocational training, and a deep appreciation for the unifying value of community and the common good. That's why I'm flabbergasted by today's clique of corporate profiteers, theocratic zealots, and laissez-faire knuckleheads who are lobbying furiously across the country to demonize, defund, and dismantle this invaluable social benefit. If ignorance is bliss, they must be ecstatic. Public schools do have some real problems. Politicians constantly slashing education budgets, professional burnout created by understaffing and low pay, the devastating strain of a killer pandemic, and a new normal of assault rifle murders. But the profiteers, theocrats, and knuckleheads aren't interested in those. Instead, focusing on what they say is the fatal flaw in public education: teachers. Yes, the claim is that diabolical educators are perverting innocent minds by teaching America's actual history, showing students that the full diversity of humankind enriches our society, and presenting our earth as something to be protected, not plundered. And worse, oh my gosh, many classroom teachers are union members. So teachers suddenly find themselves political pawns in the GOP's culture war. Our schools are a cesspool of Marxist indoctrination, squawked Senator Marco Rubio. And Donald Trump squealed that schools are run by, quote, radical left maniacs and pink-haired communists. This is Jim Hightower saying these right-wing chicken littles are demonizing America's invaluable educators because they need someone for people to hate, providing cover for their unpopular plot to privatize education.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So yesterday on the program, we talked about the Time Magazine story that it was the title. It was the headline that caught my attention. And I said, look, finally someone who can write a headline that matters. And they wrote about this Jordan Neely, who was killed on the train in New York. And the headline read, "Nobody cares about homeless people until they die." My response to that was, do they even care after? I don't think they do. But in this case, someone did. Got a lot of email response from folks angry at my position. So here to help walk through some of this, I've asked a good friend who is a homeless homelessness advocate, someone who's been for years fighting for the rights of the homeless. Our good friend Pat Lamar. She's also an author. She actually wrote our little book, Daddy, What's the Middle Class, which you can get by simply going to thericksmithshow.com. Pat, thanks for taking time for us.
Thanks for having me. By the way, happy birthday.
I was hoping to avoid that. Hoping to avoid that, but thank you.
You were avoiding it, so I thought I'd get it out of the way really quick.
But walk me through this, because, this headline caught my attention, that people, only care about homeless people when they die. I've taken the position that not even then, which got a lot of negative feedback of me being insensitive. Am I wrong?
It's really hard to say you're insensitive when you make an observation after one has died, which nobody stopped, right? So who's the insensitive one here? The people who are saying, hey, man, I think you're choking him a little tight. He just pooped himself. I think he's dying. I mean, people were literally around this guy explaining you're killing him, and he proceeded to keep killing him. I do want to say, there are a lot of people who care about the homeless. About 2,000 of them helped me put 1,200 blankets on the west lawn of the U.S. Capitol in December for Homeless Remembrance Night. The problem is we got about 10 million homeless people and a couple of thousand who care about them. But I do want to stick up for the few people who really take their time and their energy and dedicate it to people in need. There are people out there.
Right.
The problem is we have institutional disregard, right? We have this just unbridled, it's like if you want to do a whole pile of American exceptionalism, we are the wealthiest. I don't know whether or not that's exceptional because we're so damn greedy, but we are the wealthiest. We are extremely imaginative. So we're among the most imaginative nation in the world. And yet we can't solve this problem of no homes for people who don't have homes.
Yep.
And in order to make sure that everybody can sleep at night, except of course the people who don't have a home, we just perpetuate the lie about who it is. I ran shelters for the better part of a decade, and I kept records. Now they're basically anecdotal because it was only Carlisle-based shelters in central Pennsylvania. But 55% of the people in my shelters worked. They had a job. They had an income. And 30% more were their children. So 85% of the people in my shelter were the working poor and their kids. We don't even have a conversation about that. And when you start trying to have a conversation about that, you're really shut up. You're completely shut up. I mean, even our massive art installation at the Capitol, we interviewed all kinds of big shots, heads of agencies and senators and Congress people. We had all these people involved, but we couldn't talk about the definition of homelessness. Nobody wanted to talk about that. We couldn't talk about the things that if we change them would actually make a huge substantive difference. And this man on the Neely, this man is a perfect example of that. So one of the things that Housing and Urban Development does is they assess your vulnerability. And you get a vulnerability quotient. And based on your vulnerability quotient, they decide whether or not they can help you. And the amount of available money in the wealthiest nation in the world just keeps shrinking.
Yeah.
Right? So they don't have much money to help. So it's only the people with the absolute highest vulnerability quotients on a scale of 0 to 16, the 16s that get help. This guy was a 16. And he still didn't get help. The system is just it's underfinanced. And the thing Housing and Urban Development is in charge of homelessness. And the largest amount of money does not go to Section 8 or public housing. The largest amount of money goes to the middle class tax break. We spend more money using the middle class as a pass-through to big banks. You can deduct your mortgage payment so you can get a bigger mortgage. You can spend more for your house. The taxpayer will finance your mortgage and they'll pay your mortgage payment so the big banks can lend you more money. And I think that's great. Great middle class tax break. I'm not saying to get rid of it.
Yeah, because now my mind's going. Now you're framing this as this is this is the working class against the working class. This is the people who are doing okay versus the people who are certainly not. And for me, I'm not in line with that frame, because we've got way too many billionaires who are doing way too well. We've got so many people who are struggling. So for me, that's the fight for me.
And that is, but see, remember who's making the fight for us. You got to look at this guy Neely and everybody else who's on the street and think about them as your threat. It's that joke about the guy with the one cookie and the guy with the
you're right. But here's the thing. But this is the thing. I mean, we have, as I said this right from the beginning, when I heard about this case, I said, I don't know everything about it. I've heard, but what I know is when there's a lack of humane solutions, inhumane solutions fill the void. And to me, that's what this looks like. We did nothing. We didn't do enough to help keep this guy, sane. We didn't do enough to protect the people on the train. However you want to frame this, we didn't do enough, and inhumane solutions filled the void.
But the people on the train weren't in any danger. So that's the other thing.
I don't know that to be true, I don't know that to be true or false.
There's absolutely, from what I can see, there's absolutely no evidence that this guy was ever a threat to anybody. He liked to pretend he was Michael Jackson. I mean, I have people who call me the peasant whisperer.
Right.
I think it's a compliment. But, someone will be stuck somewhere in central Pennsylvania in trouble, and I'll get a phone call. So there's a guy out in the snow tonight. Okay. There's a woman with a suitcase in my neighborhood. People literally call me up and say this stuff to me. Well, there's nothing wrong with having a suitcase in your neighborhood. It's not against the law. There's nothing wrong. There's a man outside in the cold. Do you think he's going to freeze to death? Well, he might freeze to death. He's been out there and it's really cold. And I'll say, well, then call him an ambulance. Do not call him a police officer. If you want deadly force, that's when you call the police.
But that's what we've been trained to do. I mean, sadly, this is what's happened over the years. Law enforcement has been the one who has to clean up the mess. And we expect way too much out of the police. And I say all the time, I support the police when they're not wrong. There are times when dealing with people with mental illness and dealing with the homeless where they are wrong and should be held accountable. But I go back to the lack of humane solutions lead to inhumane outcomes.
It's more of that horizontal hostility, right? So they're going to pit us against the police next. Instead of saying we need more money for the problem so that there's somebody to call that doesn't use deadly force as their solution to a problem, right? You want the police when you want deadly force, and you really don't want them any other time. We need a group of people that show up that can manage the system, not some guys in the middle of the street screaming at cars. So someone comes and kneels on their back till he's dead. That's not the solution to the problem, right? But we don't want to put any money into this problem. We don't want to invest in housing for this poor man that died on the subway. We don't, and if we do invest our tiny little amounts of it, we have to make the middle class feel like they're going to lose their tax break if we have more Section 8.
Right, because that's why I stopped you.
Horizontal hostility going, right?
Right, and that's why I stopped you with the whole banking comparison, because that's what I heard. Well, it's the middle class's fault for getting these tax breaks, and I'm going to lose mine. So immediately, people are going to shut down.
No, but the thing is that all I want the middle class to know is they get housing assistance.
Okay.
They get housing assistance, but they don't want this guy on the train to get housing assistance. So when you're in the I got mine category and you've got a $200,000 mortgage that you can take off of your $1,500 a month of interest payments right off your taxes, right? Well, then you get housing assistance. And there's no reason that poor slob who just made your cheeseburger, who doesn't have anywhere to shower, by the way, bon appetit, there's no reason that guy can't have housing assistance too, because you get it, right?
So let me ask you, if you've got the magic wand, because there's a lot of people saying, well, what do we do? It seems like such an insurmountable problem. You look at San Francisco, because we see tons of video from San Francisco of all the homeless people there with their drug addiction problems, because the frame is all the homeless are just drug addicts. What do you do? How do you solve this problem? How do we get to humane solutions then?
All you got to do is the war on poverty. I mean, by the time Ronald Reagan was elected, the poverty level in the United States was under 10%. Ronald Reagan got elected, and now we're at 20 to 25% poverty, right? So what happened was every single support for the low-income worker, basically, and low-income elder orphans are a big problem on the street now. The elderly are rapidly, one of the fastest growing groups on the street. So we have this elder orphan problem, and we have people who don't have anyone to take them in when their Social Security is only $1,000 a month. And we've got all of these problems because we won't invest in people. And we won't invest in this low-wage worker. We won't invest in the people. And now, I mean, even Bernie Sanders is $15 an hour is too low. He's up to 17. People can't live on the measly wages that they're getting. And people crack wise like, oh, well, I think I'll go to work at Chick-fil-A because they're at $16 an hour now. And, I'm looking at a guy who wouldn't last 15 hours in Chick-fil-A. He'd be getting hauled off for swearing at somebody in their car, right? You wouldn't put up with the crap a Chick-fil-A worker puts up with, or a McDonald's worker, or. So we've got this, and we've got billionaires. We've got Elon Musk, who's I see a Tesla, I just want to run it off the road. I'm like, why would you give him any money?
It's the same way I feel about a blue check mark. Why would you give him $8 when you could give that to somebody on the street corner who's hungry? But how, again, you talk about the war on poverty. And I remember Reagan's war on the poor. I remember as they shattered the social safety net. Ketchup is a vegetable. I remember them slashing the school lunch programs in the summer. Where I grew up, where you went to the Purtis Elementary School and lined up in the summertime for a hot lunch, and for, like I've said a million times, for those kids in that line, it was the only hot meal they got all day. That all went away for tax cuts for the wealthy. So you're saying this is just a money problem? It's just we're not spending enough money.
It literally is the one thing when they said you can't solve that just by throwing money at it. Well, you can this. You can throw money at it and you can solve it. We need housing. It would make jobs. 30 units of affordable housing makes 100 jobs.
Now, what do you say?
And it wasn't just Reagan. It was Clinton. And I write for the Bucks County Beacon. I just did a story about the TANF, the changing
aid to defended children,
temporary aid to needy families. Do you know what Pennsylvania does? Pennsylvania siphons off 89% of that money. Only 11% of TANF block grants actually go to families in need. You want to know why families are still in need? Because there are 3,000 families getting the money and 30,000 that need it. And all that money's going to other places like crisis pregnancy centers to lie to our pregnant people and tell them that absolutely no neonatal care. Those TANF block grants are going to crisis pregnancy centers where religious people are preaching whatever lies they want to about having a baby with no health care provided, and they're getting $1.07 a minute. So someone's making over $60 an hour to lie to pregnant people and not help them. So, okay, what's the answer to no abortion? Prenatal care. They're not getting prenatal care. Instead, we're closing hospitals. And this is temporary aid to needy families. You want to know how that welfare money that actually used to help children, they don't even get it.
No, look, I'm not too proud to admit that when I was a kid, my mother a time or two had to get food stamps, and I still remember that, and it was one of the most humiliated moments of my life, and I'll still remember that till the day I die. But it was there to make sure that there was at least something. It wasn't the posh existence that I hear from right-wing people that they want to say, oh, live in the high life with the swimming pools and those projects. No, it was a meager existence, and what you're saying is they've taken that.
Right. There's food stamp. This is that money that's just supposed to help you pay the electric bill, right? Because food stamps will buy you food, but it doesn't buy you sanitary products. It doesn't buy you diapers. It doesn't pay your electric bill. It doesn't, you've got, even if you can afford your rent, this is going to, and the average person who gets TANF in Pennsylvania gets $250 a month. What is that doing? And we've got $711 million stockpiled in Pennsylvania. I'm interviewing the new Speaker of the House of Pennsylvania tomorrow about it. $711 million stockpiled of this money. Why have we got a homeless problem? Why have we got people riding the subways because they don't have anywhere to live? Because we're stealing the money that's made to help them. Yeah, fix it. Throw money at it. Oh no! As soon as you start throwing money, somebody turned it into a block grant, and it got siphoned off to something else.
Yeah. Now, I real quick, I want to go back before we wrap this up. You said that we're one of the we're a creative country. It seems to me that there's got to be a way to solve this problem. It seems to me there's got to be a creative way, and I've seen numerous places throughout the country. Denver has a giant warehouse where they have small apartments and wraparound services and all kinds of stuff to bring people to. I've seen places that do tiny little house villages. I've seen a bunch of ideas. Is there a right way? Is there a way that you would advocate for? Is there a way to solve this? Because look, I look at this Jordan Neely, who evidently hit an old lady, and in exchange for him to going to jail, they sent him to a rehab center, and he left within 2 weeks. So what do you say to the person who goes, hey, we tried to help, they didn't want it? How do you deal with that?
Well, I'll tell you, when I was sending people to rehab, I'd call and say, yeah, we got a bed, it'll open up a week from Tuesday. Make sure they keep using. Make sure they test hot. If that guy manages to kick his cocaine and he doesn't test hot when he gets here, we won't help him. So I had to go back to my homeless guy who was a heroin addict, and I used to have to say, hey, look, keep using, but don't use so much that you die, and they will take you a week from Tuesday because we don't have enough rehab beds, right? So when housing professionals or the rehab people, when they have someone who says, hey, I want to leave, and you got 16 people in line who want that bed, you say, okay, because this other guy wants help. And you do the best you can because you've been given the absolute most massive garbage sandwich, and you're just trying to eat it and save maybe one person before you retire in 35 years. And it's unbelievable how we are not investing the resources necessary, even though we know it would help, right? And most people, they don't need that huge wraparound service. They need to be able to afford a $2,000 apartment, because that's what the average is now, on $1,500 a month. So they just need help, period.
Yeah, I've argued that we need to start building Levittowns again. Lots of homes being built to give people access to get, like my grandparents' generation got, good, solidly built homes at reasonable costs, so that they can raise their families, and it seems the way forward.
I have a question real quick for you. How much is your electric bill right
now? My last month was $330.
Right. $330. Are you paying that on a low wage? No. $330 electric bill. You know what we could do to stop homelessness? We could pay people's electric bills. Because if you let your electricity go behind, you get evicted. You get evicted, then you have bad credit, then you can't get a new apartment. And you can't get a new apartment till you pay the old bill. So now you've got $1,400 in electric bills. It's not hard to figure out why people are homeless. It's hard to figure out why we don't, like you said, care till they're dead.
Yeah, it's not surprising that people are struggling. They don't have any money. And I think we learned that during the pandemic. But Pat, I appreciate the time. I appreciate the passion and the information. I would say good stuff, but not really. This is angering stuff. This should be ticking us off. But I appreciate it.
I appreciate you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much, our good friend Pat LaMarche. Remember, check out her work over at buckscountybeacon.com, where she does writing over there. I highly suggest it. Let's take a quick break. Right back to wrap things up. Stick around. Listen to The Rick Smith Show for working people. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1869. At 2:47 p.m., a one-word telegram was sent from Promontory Summit, Utah. The message read simply, done. That understated message marked the end of one of the most incredible projects ever completed by working people in the United States, the building of the Transcontinental Railroad. The arduous work of laying the rail track across the continent was completed by a predominantly ethnic workforce. It has been estimated that workers swung hammers some 21 million times, laying the track along more than 1,100 miles. Irish workers performed the dangerous work for the Union Pacific Rail Company, building the track from the east. Chinese labor made up 3/4 of the Central Pacific crews constructing from the west. Laying the track through the Sierra Nevada mountain range meant blasting through solid granite. Chinese laborers used highly volatile nitroglycerin to make way for the railroad. On some days, the track progressed as little as just a few feet. The Central Pacific Company reported that 137 workers died on the project. Newspaper reporters claimed to have seen many, many more bodies of Chinese workers. The true death toll will never be known. Both the Irish and Chinese workers not only experienced brutal working conditions, but also had to deal with discrimination. The track also cut through territories of Native American land. The railroad encroached on this land and further accelerated the displacement of Native American people. When the final golden spike was driven into the track at Promontory Summit, the nation was forever changed. The trip across the continent, which previously would take up to 6 grueling months, had been reduced to just 2 weeks. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us at Labor History in 2. Show. Check out our website, thericksmithshow.com. You know, I like Pat a lot. Pat's a good friend of mine, and it's because she's so passionate about this issue. And, you know, a lot of the email I got from folks were, you know, well, people made decisions, they made choices, it's, you know, yeah, and there are some. There's always going to be that anecdotal bit, but the part that she hit on that I did not, and I'm glad she didn't, it's the reason that I brought her on to talk about this, is the majority of the homeless folks are working poor, and as she was telling this story, it reminded me of one of the encounters we had during our Hungry and Homeless for the holiday events, where a couple with a kid with a daughter right about my oldest daughter's age, and I think, you know, she would have been probably around 10 at the time. They came to where our encampment was. And because they had heard it on the radio, and, you know, we gave them some food and stuff out of the truck, and they were looking for jobs because they had both lost their jobs, and they were, you know, already behind on their payments to their rent, and they were living out of their cars. These are people who wanted jobs, they wanted to work, and I remember sending you know, the husband to a couple of places that folks that I knew that might be hiring. And eventually they did get a job, and the story turned out well. But in this moment, they were living in their car. And I'll never forget the little girl. As long as I live, I'll never forget how heartbreaking it was. Because they stood and they talked to us for like about an hour. And when it was time to go, the poor little girl was just sobbing. Now, I had given my daughter a couple of bucks. They went into the supermarket, they bought ice cream, and they were playing like little girls play. You know, they were like two friends without a care in the world at that moment. But the second the parent said, "Come on, we've got to go," reality came falling down on that child. And I remember in that moment, and I'll never forget it, I remember thinking how fortunate I was to be in the position that I was in, how fortunate I was that I didn't have to look in my daughter's eyes and know that was our reality. And the fact that we don't do enough to help people when they're down on their luck. We don't do that helping hand thing. We've, as I said at the beginning, we've turned into a hooray for me and the heck with everybody else society. Question is, how do we use policy? How do we get back to that we want to help? I want to know what you think. Email me, Rick at thericksmithshow.com. Share your stories if you have any. I would love to hear it. If you miss any portion of the program, make sure you grab the podcast. Wherever you find your favorite podcast, you'll find ours. Thanks for being here. See you next time.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Email Rick at rick@thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.